Hello, hi everyone. We're back again to talk about Sarah's Sustainability Action Plan. I'm here today with Beth and Lindsay. Before we get started, we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Mark Parapolitza. I'm the director of Sarah's Sustainability Resources Group and also a principal. Beth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Beth Lavelle. I'm an architect at Sarah in our housing studio, and I'm also a part of our sustainability resources group.
Right. And Lindsay?
Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay Naganuma. I'm a project assist at Sarah, and I'm also a part of the Sustainability Resource Group.
Great. So we update the Sustainability Action Plan periodically, and we've just did that earlier this year. And the document is articulates our vision and provides a framework for action in a broad range of interrelated topics. I'm going to just bring it up on the screen here so you can see what that looks like. So today we're going to really get into this topic of resource management, but this is the cover of the document, and you see thumbnails of a few of the pages there. But today we're going to really get into resource management, and there are a range of resources that have all kinds of impacts, water and materials, but we're going to really focus on the materials that have a significant climate impact. And over the years, we focused a lot on energy because we know that energy use has a significant impact on climate, especially when you look at a 60 to 100-year time frame. That's a really big picture of the overall kind of pie. But as climate change has gotten more and more severe, we realize that we really need to address things in a 10 to 20-year time horizon. And when you look at that time horizon, the energy is important, but actually the embodied carbon of the buildings is immediate. That all happens right away. So we really need to address that as well. The other things that help on the energy side are just efficiency, and the grid is becoming cleaner, which we'll talk more about in just a few minutes. So I'm going to turn the screen off here for a minute, and we're going to just talk a little bit more. Lindsay, let's start with you. I know that you focused on both energy use and embodied carbon. But maybe today, let's just focus on the embodied carbon side. And you could talk a little bit about what we're working on in this past year.
Yeah, this year has been really exciting. We increased our efforts around embodied carbon. But I guess before I get into that, I'll just throw out a general definition of embodied carbon. So this differs from operational carbon, which is emissions created from using the building. Embodied carbon is actually the sum of all of the emissions, greenhouse gases, mostly CO2, um, resulting from the building materials. So from mining the materials, harvesting, processing, manufacturing, transporting those materials and installing them into the building. All of the emissions surrounding those activities, that's embodied carbon.
Great, great. Yeah, so maybe why don't we start by thinking about like at the building scale and building component scale. Do you want to talk a bit about that process for trying to better understand that, how we go about that?
Yeah, actually, we've started to use this life cycle analysis software Tally on some of our 3D models that we have. And it's really cool because you can analyze building materials, design options, and whole buildings, which is really cool because you kind of start to get an intuition about which materials have higher impacts relative to other materials. And as you start to analyze the whole building, you notice hot spots of, oh, the structure plays a big part in the embodied carbon of the building. How can we, make reductions there? And the really cool thing about this software is that it remembers material definitions that you've given it previously on a specific project, so you can easily start to rerun those analyses and kind of integrate it into the design process.
Okay, cool. So let's maybe scale up a little bit. I know that on the energy side, we report our entire portfolio of work in terms of energy performance. Are we starting to think about embodied carbon in the same way? Do you want to talk about how we're looking at the portfolio?
Yeah. So this year we've made it a goal to also report not only energy emissions, but embodied carbon emissions. And so the goal here is to quickly generate embodied carbon estimates for every project in the Sarah portfolio. And it's messy and in the early days, but this isn't about getting the perfect data. We're really just looking to have a number that we can continue to refine and make more accurate and more informative as we move forward in the future.
Yeah. The spreadsheet tool that I've seen you put together for that is great, and it looks like really promising. So it's exciting to see that come together. One thing that's interesting about it is it looks like it might have some implications, though, that we can use early on in the project. Do you want to talk about how we can use some of the findings from that, or how that maybe could be applied to conceptual design?
Yeah, for sure. The great thing about this Excel tool is that you need very minimal project information and it references a lot of general assumptions. So before you even have a 3D model, you can already start to estimate the embodied carbon of your building, which is really cool because you can start to incorporate embodied carbon into the design conversation much earlier, when oftentimes in conceptual design, you kind of lock in those big decisions of what it's going to be made out of, what's the structure, those types of decisions.
Yeah, that's great. I've heard you describe before it as like helping to build our knowledge and intuition about this, which is great because I know that like over time with energy, we've gotten better at that. We have a better feel for it. So it seems like this over time is going to help our design team better understand embodied carbon. Do you have a few comments or things that jump out at you about specific materials that really deserve a focus or that we should give special attention to?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's just two major strategies to do that, and it's kind of just like focusing on the materials that we already use a lot of, like concrete, and then just strategically picking lower embodied carbon mixes and thinking about incorporating, innovative things like injecting carbon into the concrete and things like that. But then there's also bio-based materials, kind of like heavy timber that actually sequester carbon and can store embodied carbon to make huge reductions in your projects.
Great. Yeah, that's really good. It's exciting to be using this in our work. So the work you've been doing is fantastic. So let's shift gears here and come back to energy. Beth, I want to talk to you a little bit about that. For a long time, Sarah has been really focused on making really energy efficient, climate responsive buildings. But maybe you could talk a little bit about some of our kind of most recent work and some of the emerging trends that we're tapping into.
Absolutely, Mark. We are still really focused on climate responsive design and low energy buildings, but we're talking more and more about a couple of new things. Electrification is one of them, and we'll dig into that a little bit more here. Grid optimization is another one. That's kind of a big, complicated topic at a very big scale, but essentially, grid optimization accounts for the time factor of when we use energy and load shifting potential.
hmm Great. One thing that's interesting, I guess, about it is it seems like the metrics are starting to shift. We've really
Mm.
focused a lot of attention on energy use intensity. But now, as we're thinking more about climate impacts, I'm hearing some different language. Do you want to talk a little bit about the metrics?
Yeah, we are shifting away a little bit from energy use intensity, EUI, which really is a measurement of just how much energy are we using. Um, we're shifting that metrics to more of a CO2 equivalent. So we're more concerned with what kind of energy are we using, not just how much, but what kind, and what are the impacts, the climate impacts of that, the emissions of that energy.
Right. Yeah. So that would when you say what kind of energy would be like the sources that are generating the energy, the electricity. So whether it's wind or hydro or coal. I know like in Oregon, finally the coal plants is being decommissioned. Um, so, and kind of on that topic, let's maybe talk about electrification. This is like, it seems like people are talking a lot about electrification, but that's kind of funny because I thought that 100 years ago, all buildings were electrified. But maybe you can explain what that means in today's world.
Yeah, buildings have been electrified for a long time, but what we're talking about here is really moving towards 100% electrification of buildings. So completely eliminating fossil fuel sources for energy, including natural gas. And the reason why we would do this is that we know over time that our electrical grid is going to get cleaner. We know that we're increasing every day our capacity for solar or wind generation, and we're moving farther and farther away from natural gas source or from fossil fuel sources. So electrification is talking about, let's cut the gas. We know that there's a finite amount of gas that we can use, and it's not great for our environment. So let's move to 100% electrified buildings so that we can, over time, as the grid gets cleaner, we can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've heard that the methane leakage from natural gas is really severe and
Yeah.
mostly underreported in the way the climate impacts of natural gas is talked about. So that's great. Is there kind of overall one strategy that stands out as something that you think that we will focus on? I mean, that we're currently and will tend to focus on in the future, or is it multiple strategies? What do you think the best way to
It,
characterize that would be?
yeah. I think there's not one silver bullet here for addressing the climate impacts of buildings. These new trends of electrification and grid optimization are really important, and we need to do them. But we're still really focused on driving down the climate impacts by climate responsive design and making sure that our buildings, the design is appropriate for the place that they're in, and making our buildings really high efficient. So pushing for a low EUI energy use for the building. And those are the most effective strategies and the most cost effective.
Yeah, no, that's good because it seems like sometimes sustainable buildings seem like they're maybe just for the uh, rich institutions and individuals who can afford them, but really this is something that needs to be broad, sort of widespread. And so I think thinking about what are the most effective strategies that can be applied for everyone, right? So that whole equity thing, it's not just a sort of privileged people that can have sustainable, efficient buildings, but we all need them at all levels.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So let's just a couple of final takeaways. We really have a long history at Sarah of climate responsive, highly efficient buildings, like you've talked about, and it seems like that's a really strong foundation for us to continue building on. Are there any other final things that you want to just comment on, Beth, before we sign off?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this work at Sarah. It's really leading edge, new in our industry, looking at embodied carbon really closely, continuing our work on energy analysis, and just really looking for all the improvements we can take advantage of to use our resources responsibly.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Lindsay? Do you have any final things you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, I would second what Beth said, but it's just like it's a really exciting thing to be working on, and I feel like as as an industry as a whole, we're trying to figure this stuff out, and so there, when you're kind of doing research, you kind of have those aha moments together.
Hmm. Well, that's excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate the work you're doing and the way we've been able to engage with our teams, and so I'm really looking forward to future work on this area. So just a brief note. So this is a series. Our next one that we're going to be talking about regarding our action plan is on sustainable placemaking. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you then.